51?
I think it's
51, I
51.
believe.
Hey, that's a 3
Yeah.
number. That's good.
Yeah, very good. We went right through episode 50 and we just didn't do anything about it. We didn't even acknowledge it was episode 50 and we just went straight into it, which is too bad. We should have done something fun. I don't know. I guess not.
Well, but
But,
again, 51 is better than 50. You know what I'm saying?
That's true. It's true. 52 is better than that. So we're on
52
our
is better
way.
than 51. Yeah.
Yeah, we're always on our way, making progress. Yeah. So, good morning. This is We Mortal Coils. I'm Trevor. We're here to discuss a topic question today. Get into the shit with with us four weirdos. So, thank you for coming on. Basically, the topic question we had in mind today was, what is hubris?
Hubris.
What is hubris? Hubris. However, if you say it enough, it starts to sound like spaghetti. It doesn't make any sense.
But it was just funny.
So what is it, and are we destined to be destroyed by it? That is the question. So, without further ado, Bray, good morning.
Good morning.
What?
Oh, I was like, is he going to put me on the spot first?
That's correct. I just did.
So
what is hubris?
What is
and also,
hubris?
What have you been up to? We haven't done an episode in a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably the most prominent thing, I started a new job. I started serving so that I can finally make some money and get the hell out of here. But other than that, pretty much the same old. As far as hubris is concerned, I don't have a dictionary definition, but it definitely has to do with sort of like a particular kind of self-conception, or maybe it's definitely used in a negative context. Maybe being full of oneself, being too prideful, being too confident. And so I would like to talk about a lot today the maybe not historically recent, but definitely culturally recent phenomenon of the manosphere, which is sort of the
Not the manosphere.
Yeah. It's sort of the encapsulation of this new young generation of men who are super into the alpha male mindset, or just being really fucking cocky and arrogant, and the world is supposed to revolve around you, or I don't know.
Real quick, Bray, have you had a chance to see Jordan Peterson get
I've watched the first few minutes. Yeah, I watched.
I haven't seen it yet. But I'm gonna go see it. I'm gonna go. So
are we
talking about
20 atheists?
Yes.
Yeah, those
I
atheists.
was going to say, is that the one? Is that the one?
Yes.
All right.
And
I also, yeah.
Bray just brought up the manosphere, and so I had to bring up.
So Jordan Peterson, he's kind of wedged himself a little bit of a spot in the manosphere, but these are typically roles occupied by people like Joe Rogan or Andrew Tate, or that one dude that was on live stream with Trump or something like that, where they just have objectively bad takes about how to be a man or talk to women, or anything remotely to do with just being a good person. So, and my point about that is that it's an entirely hubris fueled environment. So
I see. Well, that's an interesting excerpt. I wanted to briefly mention why I thought this topic would be an interesting one, or why I encountered this question, why I thought it was so meaningful, because I think it says more about me. Because we all come up with these questions, and I think the audience themselves, it's actually kind of funny. They can sort of, without us bringing up who it is, or whoever it is that introduces, you could almost sort of figure out whose topic question it is just on the question itself. Once you just get to speak to any of us, you start to see our neuroses a little bit, and then you can kind of deduce, okay, yeah, this is Trevor's question.
Yeah.
But so I was interested in this question of what is hubris, because it has a lot to do with why I got into science and why I got into doing research. Because when I got into it initially, sophomore year of college, when I was oh, I could do research, I could do science, that's what I could pursue in my life. It was part of it was the feeling that there is something out there, and the people that pursue or in the pursuit of understanding the extremely complex and interesting reality that we live in, scientists, all this, must be very wise. But that isn't the case.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's not how it works. It's not. It's much more interesting that is not that is occasionally the case, but amongst the people that you see in academia, and I'm not speaking about anyone that I work with and on a personal level. That's not what I'm referring to. Just the people that you see as you engage with academia as a whole. The people that you see, there are certain types. I guess you could call them prima donnas. What's
Mm.
like a good phrase? People who are intelligent. I'm sure they have a high IQ, but they're also highly neurotic or highly self-centered, self-confident, to a detrimental effect. And
Hmm.
it's incredibly common. These people that go out and like are well renowned in the field or just well known also have quite uh, serious egos, quite very, very serious egos. And you can occasionally see it destroy them because one thing that an ego does is it's not in service to science. It's not in service to the scientific method. The one thing it corrupts the most, I think, or that's this really self-corrupt development of it, hubris, is its ability to completely destroy one's want to just seek out something through logic or through empiric discovery. Uh, One's self-ego can completely obliterate that, and it's so common in this in this thing that we do in the scientific field in academia. So that was the reason why I wanted to bring up this question, partly. And it's I wouldn't call it in juxtaposition to the manosphere point, just like another aspect, another glass lens looking at this particular question. So with that in mind, Steph, if you have any particular idea, like I really kind of want to hear what you think when you hear hubris, and if you hear it and you go, oh yes, yeah, that is a problem, but it's this. Like I'm curious how you think.
Well, I mean, like, you know, to I don't know, to suggest that it's not a problem, like there we would have a long conversation if you thought that it wasn't a problem, right? And I don't know, like I don't want the viewer to be out there thinking, hey, these people have said something, so incredibly obvious. Like, we're trying to talk about why, to us or why to, other people or whatever. But my first thoughts were, I think I think that, you know, hubris or like pride is, and I thought about this in like a social setting, you know, but deeper as well in like an ape setting, because that's where we are. And I think it's shame and avoidance. I think it's shame and projection, either of those really. And then I think it's assumption,
Mm.
right? So like, you know, I think I actually think that that last one is very prevalent to the way we use that word nowadays. For example, if we take Bray's example of the manosphere, right, and that's such a neat little packaged word to say. Like everyone knows what you're talking about when you say the manosphere.
Yeah.
Like, especially if you have a good head on your shoulders, you know the kind of people who we're talking about, and you know them in your personal life. And so, like, how could we connect assumption to that? Like I'm trying to do here. It's not a quantum leap. It's not a very big stretch. The
No.
manosphere assumes that men are in the right, like for all
Mm.
things whatsoever. That like men are assumed to have the right idea, or just an answer. Does that make sense to everybody here? Like men are
Right.
just kind of assumed to have an answer on a question, even though we know nothing. You know what I mean? You're just kind of assumed to have an answer, and it's a problem. It's a very big problem. And so that's my initial answer. Would be that one.
You,
And Winslow's
so
joining me.
very good. Well, now we've brought up the manosphere twice now. I can't help but wonder. So what? All right, so if not self-confidence, what is masculinity? Like,
There's nothing. There's
like, do we
nothing
have
wrong
a?
with confidence, right? As long as it's not misplaced, and
Right.
self-confidence is probably
It's like
misplaced.
one of those things, like
You
it's
know,
your
so it's not
confidence
necessarily a
should
bad
not
thing.
be the confidence. Oh, I think it was a slight little timing error there. But no, I was going to say the confidence should not derive solely from the fact that you are a man and therefore you are like, it's kind of like what Stefan was talking about. Like, because you are a man, you are expected to have an answer. It's just like if you said because you are a man, you're expected to be a certain way. It's like how what's some stupid example I can think of off the top of my head? The Fox News host Jesse Waters or whatever that has that show that they just talk about random bullshit to get views. Uh, he's gone on air and said that sipping from a straw is not masculine. Like sipping water out of a glass with a straw or anything is not masculine, despite the fact that there's clear video evidence of him doing it. And anybody literally who's ever drank anything has probably at one point in their time drank out of a straw. And then it's just an asinine example, but it's like it's trying to box in all of these things and define what it means to be a man or masculine or whatever.
But it's
And
funny, Bray. One of the first things, like the first words that come to my head whenever the word hubris is put like on the table, so to speak, is asinine. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
everything that hubris poisons is asinine.
there's nothing wrong with confidence, but a lot of people are confusing confidence these days with being an asshole or being disrespectful or unsympathetic or like what's the word I'm looking for? Nonchalant. Like basically, it feels like there's this cult of personality around like just not giving a shit these days.
It's because
So,
all of it fits an avoidant pattern.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
That's what I said earlier, shame and avoidance.
like Steph said, like literally, I was like, you nailed it. Like I was like, yeah, that's exactly it. Like these are very clearly people with like wounded egos, and they have these propped up projections of things, of reality, that allow them to kind of cover up or avoid looking at that wound directly. And this is also why like those individuals tend to be extremely explosive.
Yes.
Anytime the ego is trying to protect itself, you get into really like easily bomb blowing up territory with an individual. Especially when you like directly like try to make them look at it.
Oh yeah, no, seriously,
so
like no, and I don't mean to derail. I just going to bring up like by no means is there ever been a shortage of the kind of issues that these characteristics create in people and the sort of conflicts that happen as a result of those. Those have existed since the dawn of time. But I can't tell you just on a personal level how many people I know that have talked to me or I have heard by extension through someone else about somebody's conflict with a partner that just is completely holed up and won't even like even just bringing up like here's how you could be a better person or here's how you could help, completely normal like bare minimum stuff, and somebody just explodes and it's like you've reached in and stabbed them through their heart because men have been taught to not face those problems before and don't look inward like that.
well, so kind of
I
taking a
want to
step
cut down
backwards
the
for a
gender
moment.
barrier here, but yeah, go
Yeah, so
ahead,
do
Bradley.
I. I wanted to kind of get rid of the concepts of
Women
like
can
an us and
absolutely be
them.
shitty too. It's an everybody kind
Yeah,
of thing.
we can get into this. Yeah. So I wanted to. So I was doing a little bit of searching around, and I want to briefly mention something about hubris that might be useful, specifically in the masculine paradigm, but it doesn't need to be. This is just unilateral. It could be applied to anyone. So while one thing is self-confidence, let's say a good form of masculinity, or just like a good form of confidence is just confidence in one's abilities. While a corrupted form of confidence, hubris, is one where you have confidence in your abilities that is accompanied by a feeling of deep superiority to people that are around you. I
Mm,
think that's the difference. I do. Confidence over here is just confidence in my ability that is accompanied with the knowledge that all of you are also beings that are capable of great things. While over here, hubris is the ability or the ability to do this. Like I am the lisan al gaib, like that's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Like I am the chosen one. That is hubris, I think, and is ultimately self-defeating, and that's why you see it so many times. And that's why it's such a common motif in Greek mythology. Like to be so to fill yourself up with that God spirit, that feeling of that deep, rageful narcissism that could exist within you will necessarily be self-defeating, will distance you away from the rest of reality, and will destroy you. So that's like the other part of this discussion I wanted to get into a little bit later, talking about like what does hubris do to people, like what is the long-term
right.
effects. But I want to
Well,
briefly mention that, and I bring up
real quick,
masculinity, but I don't think it's relevant
real
specifically to that.
real
Yeah.
quick. I just want to posit some like non like myth, type of language on this. Could we say that you're talking about whenever people have a self ideal, like, or rather an idealized like version of their self, or even delusions, even delusions of grandeur, you know?
Well, people can have an ideal version of themselves. I'm sure. I mean, I
Everyone
do. I'm sure.
does. Everyone does.
Exactly. So,
And I think
well,
the question becomes, instead of,
mhm.
not just what you're saying, but adding on what we know about it today, how, I think the problem becomes whenever that idealized version becomes like everything. You lose touch with reality,
Mm.
type
Mm,
of
Yes.
situation.
Yes, and then it kind of, and where it metastasizes, where it gets dangerous, is where you don't realize that everyone else is in the same paradigm. Everyone else also considers such a thing as an ideal self that they're trying to move towards. Well, not everyone, but I think most, generally speaking.
Most, yeah, if not all.
Mm. Yeah. Yes. So this might be a good way to encounter hubris, at least for me. I want to speak briefly, like we speak about hubris as it's a negative. This is a thing. This is a bad thing. Is it strictly a bad thing because it leads to negative outcomes? Like, why exactly do we speak of it in this negative context?
So, um, both for the individual and for those surrounding the individual, long-term hubris basically destroys social order, is what I would say is probably why it's bad, intuitively. Um,
I, I,
because we,
I don't
yeah,
think that we hate hubris. I think we love it. I think we eat it up, and I think we drool over it.
Ooh.
I think part of that is a projection and like, oh, that guy's super cool and he does the thing that I wish I could do. And there's a little bit of hero worship going on there, that kind of parasocial
But I
idolization.
don't think it's little, Michael. I think that Donald Trump won.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Donnie. Um, so he's a really prime example of active hubris unimpeded, and then in combination with like. So okay, from a pure power manipulation perspective, hubris in individuals absolutely can move mountains, right? So that's kind of part of the appeal, is that individuals who exhibit hubris while also being well resourced and well connected can indeed do incredible things, and they will direct things. I mean, selfish things. These are typically selfish goals because you're feeding a wounded ego, but like they are accomplishing things that we consider to be quite incredible. The
Okay,
pyramid.
okay. So,
So, yeah,
let me ask you. Let me ask you a quick question, though. So, what if most of the people who I would consider to have, runaway hubris, like completely off the rails type of out of touch with reality pride, right? What if I were to posit that most people who are like that do not are uncoupled from the resources that you're talking about? I think it's part of the human condition. And I'll put forth an anecdote. All right, this is not evidence. This is an anecdote. Okay? I can talk about my personal situation with this one. I was more, I was practically raised by a dude who I'm no longer in contact with, my grandfather, and this dude, thought that he had a private and unique and individual relationship with God, and this dude also thought that he had a private, unique, and individual revelation about like what he was saying and what God wants on this earth and so on. This was not just because he was taken, he was completely hoodwinked by like the Pentecostal movements in like the 60s and 70s and so on. Not just because of that. He had an individual narcissism. And what I'm trying to say is that like all he had to do was convince me and others that he was capable. He didn't have to actually demonstrate capability. He just had to convince others that he was capable.
Right, through that display of confidence, the way that he held himself, through the way that he talked and acted, I assume.
Yeah, so like, you get what I'm saying. Like, all he had to do was convince others that he was wise. He didn't have to demonstrate wisdom, which he never did. Not once did he do it.
Well, I think he did, though. Well, hear me out. I think he did, and he failed, and that's why you don't follow him anymore. That's what I would argue to that. I think, like, I think it's kind of interesting. Like I speak about, like a little bit earlier, I was talking about like hubris is detrimental in the long term, and then Michael said essentially the same. That it's detrimental to the social welfare of the people around you. So I think in the end, it's a bit like so hubris will allow you to make any sort of way of playing this game of encountering reality has some degree of success, and I believe the corrupting nature of hubris is essentially that which isolates itself further along, or basically makes itself so someone with hubris abstracts and thinks of reality so distant away from the way that the rest of the social hierarchy, everybody else, this network of people think of reality. They become so separated from it that eventually they get punished by it, in a sense. Like they make a move in this reality. They do something which is so away from what everyone else understands reality is that essentially reality snaps them in the eye. They make a decision where they go out, and I'm trying to think of a good example you could use in this context.
I'm trying to think of a counterexample.
Oh, please do.
Well,
But
like the first thing that comes to mind are like dictators who died peacefully in their beds. You know what I mean?
it's
Like
true.
the people who never encountered reality, but except by death. But I mean, in their headspace, I mean, they never had to let go of their hubris. They never had to change anything. They just had to keep doing what they were doing. Like, because again, I'm really sitting here thinking, all it takes is for one ape to convince another set of apes that he or she is right about everything.
I do want to say this, and I think it's relevant, that people are willing to make all kinds of excuses for someone with an excessive amount of hubris if they believe that that person can deliver on goals or desires.
All it takes is that they believe that they can deliver.
From a personal level, like an interpersonal level, whether it's a friend, a spouse, a partner, anything like that, to a representative level, like something like the president. If you, like you said, can convince somebody else that you are capable of delivering on a goal that that person wants completed or seen to fruition, then people will make all kind of excuses for why your ego is blown out of proportion. None of that seems to matter. It's just like you can hear these people that love Donald Trump talk on the street about, well, don't you care about what, him saying all of these really like outlandish things or these really rude comments, like, or whatever. And they're like, no, actually, I think that's probably pretty good. But he's doing things that people seem to believe that they want to happen. And so, who cares about his personality if he's going to deliver on these things? It comes down to principles, maybe at the end of the day, or values, and where you really draw the line in your day-to-day life.
So I can't help but think now of like the difference between those who make rules for themselves and those who exist within the rule-based like paradigm, the rule-based order that we exist
Ooh.
in. I know. I was using a phrase. I was quoting. Anyway, so I think there's kind of this difference now that we're kind of breaking into here because I was making an argument just a second ago that I think we're slowly invalidating of uh, of hubris or narcissism in that sense, corrupting one to such a point that where they make a mistake and they are destroyed. And I was going to try to come up with an example there, but the issue here with this narrative, with this point of view, is that we're all eventually destroyed. We all eventually are defeated. You know, like eventually, and I mean both in the terms like we're all eventually going to die, but also our ideas, our narratives are eventually superseded by other ones, like eventually followed by others. Uh, so I'm a little. It's really difficult for me to grab a hold of and say like full stop. You know, people with deep narcissism always lose. People who are loving and serving to their communities always win. I want to say that, but at the same time, it's difficult, and I can't help but think of individuals throughout history. Like we can just let go of the absolute modern day and just focus on other time periods where people such as
Jesus.
well, sure, or I think a better example actually would be Muhammad.
Alexander.
Uh, Alexander is also a good example. So leadership qualities, these people fought for, and this is where it gets complex because these people come in and redefine, they re-engage with reality and read and rewrite exactly what it means to be a moral person, what it means to exist in a space, and all of this. So that's important in the sense that they have this, they believe that they have something special and unique and distinct away from everyone else. And they also do actually fulfill much of their destiny, I guess you could say. They do all of the things that they want. Although Alexander, I suppose, doesn't in the end. And depending what your maximalist war aims are, I suppose. So like these people are narcissistic in many cases, but at the same time, it does appear that they have some ability to uh how would you describe it? Like how would you describe the relationship between that leader and the ones that follow them? Is it strictly subservient? Is it is there a deep narcissism there, period, or is it something else? Is there like more of a benevolence or a loving nature towards those which follow them? Like I'm trying to understand exactly what we mean by hubris when we get into these very specific cases, like those particular cases throughout history. Oh,
Excuse me. I was muted.
huh.
Whenever just trying to return to the original definition that I put together. Not that that's a special one or anything, but I can immediately relate what you're talking about, Trevor, to, of course, shame and projection, shame and avoidance. So, like, if your favorite person in the world was coming under fire and you didn't understand any of the evidence about it, you would jump to their defense. That's a problem. You shouldn't. You should wait for the evidence. But you know that you do that. All four of us and the viewer, you do it. If someone disparaged your mother, right? And you'd leap to her defense. You would. I mean, depending, of course, on your relationship with your mother. You guys get what I'm saying. And then what if you heard, bulletproof evidence that she had done something horrible? What now?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the bottoms give out on that one. So think about it. If your favorite dear leader is now dead, all right, consumed by the laws of entropy in this universe and so on, encountering reality, in a very big way, right? I love that movie, The Death of Stalin. How many of us have seen it?
I absolutely
That
love
was
that
just
movie.
That
It's
movie
such a good
is
movie.
that
Yeah.
movie is hilarious. Seeing them all scramble around trying to literally insert Stalin in the mythos in real time. It's like these statecraft people, as played by comedians, have like a really deep understanding that if they don't do it now, they'll lose their window to do it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so, shame. What's the source of the shame? Well, our dear leader did problematic things. Our mother did problematic things, right? Avoidance. let's just forget about it. Projection, let's blame the enemy for the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's pretty concrete. You got a pretty solid foundation on that.
Sure. I feel like I need to. Please, yes.
I do want to pick apart having an ego versus acting in hubris. I think.
Yeah, we've all got ego, right?
Does it become hubris when you fuck up? Oh, can I?
Yes, you can. Yeah, it's fine. Does it become hubris?
Michael, I think that is the question. Like, does it only become hubris when you screw up?
You know, when Icarus flew too close to the sun, was it hubris up until the point where he was like a couple
yeah. When on the spectrum from us to the sun did it become hubris? Right.
Well, I guess you have to say, can you only calculate hubris in hindsight, or is it possible to,
Before that, it's courage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you like, yeah, really. I guess you'd have to say, is there a way for you to determine whether or not somebody is acting within reason before like a climax, or like there's like some sort of mathematical term for an
inflection point.
I can't help but wonder if, in a sense, we're saying someone like, I mean, I bring back Dune again, but like Paul Atreides, does he not have hubris because he literally wins the entire? Just focus on book one. Just like he's literally absolutely right the entire time. Like he's the chosen one.
But so I'm not a Dune man. Is he right because he has like some sort of access to knowledge that makes him right?
Right.
And he just can work off of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not hubris. That's just being right, and that's like, what good is being the one if you're the only one who knows it? Quote Jake Cole.
Well, the issue with all of this is we're trying to conform a narrative in a storybook to actual reality, and it's not like there's no as far as I'm aware, there is no quote knowledge that I can be.
But Trevor, at the same time, we live in a day in time. We live in a point in time where people who run the country believe that the narrative that they believe in will come to pass. So it doesn't matter if it's real or not. They're going to make it happen. I'm talking about these deeply Christian-held beliefs that, that they make prophecies about Trump. You know what I mean? And then when then they just kind of wait for them to come true because just give it some time. He will either say one thing or the other to make it.
Look, re-examine. I mentioned briefly earlier, and I feel like it may play a little bit more of an important part. Re-examine the idea of like values and virtues in relation to this idea of hubris, and trying to evaluate when does something become hubris, or when is something hubris? Because we're talking about really, we're dancing around this idea of hubris bad, but for what? Why kind of thing. So I mean, like we it may be a little bit more difficult for certain cases when we use a fictionalized event to describe this, but I think in fiction we maybe cut the morality of an issue even cleaner than something in reality. So taking one of these characters like Paul Atreides, or popular other characters like someone from Lord of the Rings, or Anakin Skywalker, or anything like that. They have a lot more clear-cut moral motivations or things like that. And so, for example,
they are hyperbolic on purpose.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So this may be an easy one, because the entirety of the prequel trilogy of Star Wars is based around the hubris of this one guy that reaches a point that turns him into the character from the original film. Literally in the third movie, he's talking about, I'm not the person I should be. I want more. I'm better than all these other people. I can overthrow the Chancellor. I'm him. And the whole point is that he's living in a social and moral order that does not want him to do any of those things. And you can obviously break down and say, well, is this moral code and order even good, any good? Like, is it even worth a shit? Um,
I think we're starting to like beat around the master versus slave morality bush at
oh,
this
yeah.
moment. I think we are. No, yeah, I think so. I think I can't help but think of all the stuff in the genealogy of morals and Nietzsche and all that as we talk about this, like that evolution from like part 3 to part 4 of Star. I can't believe we're doing Star Wars again, but why not? So getting into Star Wars though, like
Yep.
you get into that's like
You're
the
a damn
Jedi or whatever it is, like the slave morality, caring for others, all of that malarkey, like Christian mythos there.
mhm.
And I am being funny. I don't mean to
Not
speak of it like
Christian
that.
mythos in the Jedi.
Yeah. Well, yes, actually, yes. So there's that, and on the other side of it, you have the master morality that that of like the Greeks, like very early Greeks who would go around just conquering neighbors. The Spartan philosophy, I guess you could call it, or maybe the Assyrian philosophy, the ancient Assyria, the Assyrian Empire is probably the best example of it, of just conquering one's enemies and being powerful. Rome as well, definitely Rome as well. So that I think there's that we're contesting the tension that now exists presently between those two different moral orders that you could have if you want them. And in the slave morality, hubris is the ultimate uh, ending of the narrative for these people who destroy themselves when they isolate, when they become so
Mhm.
narcissistic, so individualized, or whatever it is you want to call it, that it's self-destruction. But one thing that's interesting is even in Greek philosophy or even in Greek mythology, which was even there within like a master morality framework, there were still there were still tales and legends that involve hubris. That's still present, even in the master morality, I guess you could say.
Is it
Although
considered
I don't
differently though? So
certainly,
a
yeah,
lot of a
please.
lot of our post Christianity slave morality oriented little stories and books and whatnot have you. Uh, they do this hyperbolic portrayal of the character with hubris, um, and almost assuredly will show that they have some sort of downfall, they get betrayed, whatever. Um, and it's like the moral of the story is, ooh, seeking power bad or something, which is a total slave like. I'm trying to phrase this in a spicy way, but not be too spicy. But like that's a total slave move. Like, yeah, of course you would have a story about how the big guy who steps on everybody, he trips and falls and dies. Oh, that
But
makes you feel better, doesn't it, little slave?
and I know what Michael's thinking about, I believe, and Michael's also thinking, I think, well, of course, it's also slave morality because the masters told them that that's what they should believe. Is that, powerful people eventually die.
Hey, I'm kind of like stepping on you and exploiting you, and I'm gonna die. It's cool,
It's
right?
okay.
You're gonna win in the end. I support this message. I'm in the wrong.
So Michael, real quick, I want to actually want to talk directly to you about this real quick. I just wrote down something that I was kind of tap dancing around earlier when we were talking about it, when we were talking about how things get manipulated and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But I wrote down slave morality equals hubris is the ultimate evil. Master morality, hubris is the ultimate challenge. In other words, the people who are historical figures are those who subsumed their hubris for as much time as possible for a greater hubris. In other words, can I retract my initial hubris to serve a greater goal of power, money, whatever, right?
Yes.
So that I can be more prideful, so that I can be more privileged later. You know what I mean? And why did I think about that? Of course, we were talking about movies and stories real quick, and I thought about Pulp Fiction. Whenever he's sitting there talking to what's his name? No, I can't remember.
Marcellus Wallace?
No. Marcellus Wallace is talking to Bruce Willis.
character.
Anyway,
Oh, Bruce Willis'
Willis.
character.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Okay.
whenever he goes,
I
that
see.
pride fucking with you.
Yeah.
You got to get over that pride, and then he wasn't able to throw the match or whatever, and then he had to go on the run. That was pride fucking with him.
Hmm. Well, all right, so that's a strong. I really like that. Like, I really do like this whole point about the ultimate challenge. So here's one motif that you do see in Greek mythology in that time is also the idea of the god man, someone who can ascend, or someone who is essentially able to become a god. And not just Greece. I just mean throughout. Like that motif exists in much of ancient history, where you see like this idea of somebody such as like Augustus, who is able to essentially become a god when he dies, or before him Julius. Or if you were to focus on like the Greeks, you could focus on people like it's not
Talos.
a pristine example. Well, sure, if you want to go that way, thanks. But it's not a pristine example. But you could do like not Achilles, but the Hercules or
Heracles, yeah.
Heracles. Thank you. Yeah, I always mess that up. But yeah, so you have this idea, and why do I bring this up? I bring this up to say that
I
there are
would
some
say
people.
Odysseus, right?
Odysseus? Well, he's just an old man. He's trying to get home. That's his
That's
story.
true, but there at the end,
Yeah.
I mean, Athena like pretty much makes him a demigod. He can still crush men like 20 years his junior and whatnot. I mean,
Point. But I bring this up to say that these people, hubris doesn't really enter in, does it? Because hubris is like being almost against the gods, or a lot of the time in like Greek mythology, like this idea that I can like ride my chariot up to Mount Olympus and meet them, and that's hubris. So
and
then
hubris
Zeus
belongs
strikes me down.
exclusively to the gods.
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Or that kind of like the ability, the degree of power belongs only to the gods. And then like Zeus will strike the charioteer down with a bolt of lightning, destroyed.
I'm gonna give you. I just typed it on Edom Online because I was curious about the etymology of hubris. From the Greek, hybris, wanton violence, insolence, outrage, which was originally presumption towards the gods.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, so there's that, and like there are plenty of myths where people are destroyed by the gods for their hubris against the gods. But there are also like god men or god like demigods that come up and
Who
become
play at the
gods
game of hubris.
and then win the game and,
Yeah.
and join the gods at Mount Olympus. Like
Yeah.
those also happen in the story. Absolutely ludicrous because you have this strange like it's almost a competition where there's like this this thing at the very end of the line is godhood, like
Mhm.
the most ultimate divinity, like attaining divinity.
To be remembered past your own frail life.
Socrates, based or presumptuous?
I've got a quote from something I watched recently, related to this. It's just like the through line. May those who follow their fate be granted happiness. May those who defy it be granted glory.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. All right. That's pretty good.
And Bray would like to quote, of course, only a Sith deals in absolutes.
There's something I do want to talk about in this episode that I was thinking about earlier, and I'm glad I just remembered it. I don't, and you can tell me if this is completely unrelated, but I feel like do you feel like we would be better or worse off as a society if honor was more important, like it used to be in the days of old? Do you understand what I mean by that?
How far back do you mean?
Yeah,
Well,
really.
I don't mean like honor like I just slew 2,000, Persians in the fucking Mediterranean and now I've brought
More like
peace to the... Yeah. I mean like being an honorable person in the sense of like, like I'm talking Caesar, like, and Brutus is an honorable man, even though that line is meant to be intentionally facetious. I mean, like, in that sort of language, like, oh, Trevor, Michael, Stefan, he is an honorable man. Like, I don't feel like that sort of...
we would be worse off. I'd be willing to say that.
You think so?
Well, because honor suggests something cosmic, and there's nothing right or wrong
Okay.
about our
Well,
actions fundamentally.
if we could eliminate the cosmic nature of that word and say,
I don't think you
the
can.
idea of being an honorable person for your
I think
community,
I
I
as
think
think
we're
the
talking
opposed.
cosmic
about.
idea of it was still based in a physical material reality in the first place, but that's a different discussion, I guess.
The reason I bring that up is because I feel like the this concept that we've been talking about, hubris, is incredibly self-centered, and it has to be, um, it's all very inward driven, very individual. And so I'm thinking about like trying to think of something on the contrary that could be looked at potentially as a positive that is more outwardly driven toward a community of people. And I know that, in times before, to be an honorable person, to, be renowned in this sense, often had to do.
Bray, why do we keep talking about a time before? Honor killings are still a thing that happen in the present day. It's not a good thing for us. It's not a good thing for human
Well,
life.
I don't mean like killing anybody for
Right. But what
for
I'm trying to say is that like honor is a loaded term.
right.
At the end of the day, it can only be an individual meaning thing. It just so happens that a lot of individuals believe that honor is sated whenever you kill your relatives for doing something that brought shame to a family.
Hmm.
Like, why is that good for us? That's not good for anybody.
Well, right. That's not what that's not the part of the term that I'm trying to use. I maybe
I
there's a different
understand,
Do
but
you
adjective.
what I'm actually trying
mean
to drive forward is that I think that those are put together forever. I don't think you
Oh yeah,
can
you don't think you
separate
think those
them.
are inseparable?
do
Exactly.
you
Okay.
mean more perhaps towards a sense of nobility or the act of nobility?
But again, to kind of pull a Trevor here,
Hmm.
people who think that they are working within the spirit of nobility or honor or whatever like that, why do I say it is necessarily cosmic? Because they believe that their perceived right actions will be perceived as right forever, and it's just not true.
How about
Killing
Well,
chivalry?
killing 2,000 Mediterraneans back in the day was seen as a good action. Bray, you said that maybe we can dispense with that, and I'm over here thinking we can't dispense with that. They thought that that was a good thing.
See this.
so so here's
it,
the thing.
go
I
ahead.
think we're kind of, yeah. Sorry, we're kind of getting into what would be the word, like the teleological, or the structure of morality, the structure of the nature of these things, and what am I trying to say? I'm trying to encounter this whole point about honor, and Steph, you're getting into this whole point. Sorry, I'm gonna have to think about this because I had a point and I'm
No,
trying
it's
to
okay.
remember it.
I see. I'm trying to think about. I started mentioning the whole manosphere thing, and now there's this really negative and toxic attitudes of masculinity and all that. And I'm not trying to like dive back into that side. I'm trying to look at a different side of it. It's like if we could change it and morph it into something else that still deals with the traditional like understanding of masculinity or this thing of hubris we've been talking about. It's like I'm trying to find the word to describe, well, can we do this instead again? And that's why I just Googled to make sure I knew exactly what chivalry
Well, Bray,
meant.
I would just encounter, I would just visit you one humanist to another, and I would say, careful consideration for what will happen as a result of your actions.
Well, right. Well, but that doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well as like.
I know it doesn't, and that's
That's
why
what I'm
the
saying.
right wing people keep beating us because they're good at
We
they're
have no
better at
narrative.
slogans. All right.
We need a good narrative.
So okay, so that's one thing I wanted to get into here is just speaking about narrative. Okay, so when we speak about nobility or of honor, as Bray did, and then Steph would say, well, that first of all, these things aren't true. Like, there's no objective basis from which we derive notions such as nobility and such as honor. I think if you want to actually have a working like moral figure, a humanist or whatever it is you want to call it, figure that works and functions and is and acknowledges and actually functions within space. You do have to acknowledge that they aren't objective. You do have to acknowledge that these things are not like these things aren't honorable because the gods say that they're honorable. You have to acknowledge the fact that if you wanted to create a working functional form of morality or working functionally cohesive honor system, you would have to first and foremost say that these things aren't written in stone. These things aren't bestowed upon us by the gods. These are all contingent upon
They
something
never
that we
were.
want. Yeah. Well, they never were, yes,
They were
but basic
contrived by man for man in ancient
certainly.
times in order to corral the slaves, in order to corral the people into a unified front. Because it turns out narrative is the one way you do that.
Yep.
You can't do it another way. You can't have the people have no basis of mythos to work off of that they all agree on. You get chaos. Now, maybe there are nobility who fall into the category of actually drinking the Kool-Aid, but there will always be a contingent of intelligent individuals who see the charade for what it is,
and operate
it,
within it.
and operate within it,
Mhm.
and they become the most powerful within the whole dang thing.
That's why I told
Because they're-
somebody the other day,
yeah.
and they got upset at me because they were Christian. I told them we need the new DLC for the Bible. It's been too long, and society's starting to deteriorate. So
Yeah,
I'm like,
frankly,
can we get a new?
Bray, did you ever have an opportunity to play Dragon Age?
I played
Ooh, I played
Inquisition
Dragon
a
Age.
little bit.
Well,
I played 'em
I feel
all.
bad for you, but anyway, Michael, did you play Origins? Like, did you play the whole
Absolutely.
thing?
Yeah.
I love that game so much, and it's
It's
touching
beautiful.
on what Bray was just talking about. Like within the game, like lore state or whatever, and they completely trash things. I believe with Inquisition, that's another thing altogether.
There's a lot of retconning, yes.
So look. Origins comes around. They have this like really established like fantasy religion or whatever, and by the time of Inquisition, they're in such a need of a new DLC on their religion that like the magic system
Drostens
like
versus the,
creates one for them.
Oh,
But like it's so
God.
strange. Like and Bray, if only it was so easy as like
Yeah.
metaphysical claims to create a new fucking
Right.
gospel.
Well, we kind of are in a position where we have to at this point. Like that's what's strange about
it's
this.
so incompatible with everything we
Well, the thing-
encounter.
Well, the meta of all of this is where it's quite difficult. And this is the thing I was trying to talk about when I spoke about honor. The older systems that we existed with had this notion of things which are pleasing to God or things that are pleasing to the gods. What if you want to go all the way back to Socrates? And like our moral space existed within that framework. And we can get into a whole point about power or narrative or the master versus the slave. We could talk about all that, but I don't want to talk about that right now. I want to talk about this. I want to talk
Okay.
about basically where we are in this position now in 2025 and the need to create a new way of encountering morals, a new system for encountering. Because we can all acknowledge that if we were to try to create a system, a notion of morals or a notion of honor, for example, because I think honor could be a very good thing if we were to use it in the right way. I think it could be a very good thing.
But
I
Trevor,
think if
real
you
quick,
wanted to create a system, and I think it's required that we create a system where we have to acknowledge that the system that we are creating exists without the gods, and that's really quite challenging and really quite difficult. And I think that is the predicament that we're in
Right.
right now. We're going to need to do that because eventually it's just not going to function. It's going to need to evolve. It's going to need to evolve.
Postmodernism and the rug pull of truth has run its course, and we have chaos. And right now, the Trumpists are basically trying to reassert that because the people are already primed for it in the states.
You would
through
think
Christian
that
lens.
you would
Stressing, really.
you would think that the most self-serving species on the planet would be jumping straight to a system in which we were just like, the best thing ever is that we just serve our own needs, human being needs, to the best of our ability.
But you're not. You can't get rid of people's sense of the transcendent, and you can't get rid of people's sense of like deity. That's not going to go away.
Not
that
all at once anyway.
I don't believe Gen Pop is capable of not having that stance.
but Michael, I'm gonna go ahead and call you out on that. Because at the beginning of this episode, I even was tempted to bring up how much I detest speech, just like what you just said, like calling other people NPCs and whatnot. I come down on people hard every time I hear it, and I'm coming down on you
such
hard
a good
on
example.
it right now. Like,
That's why I
It's such
started
a
giggling when he
we
said
we
that. I was
we
like,
we exist on such a ridiculously like central tendency like bell curve. We're all about as intelligent as each other. I'm sorry. We can get over it.
well. Here's one thing I want to bring up about that. Um, so when I speak of someone's religious nature, we could talk about like some people like they need the anesthetic or whatever it is that religion is. They need that self. I want to say like we could talk about people like all of humanity and whether or not people need that self. But we could
right.
also talk about individuals.
Yeah.
Individuals themselves,
Oh, I think
because
Be-
that's
an
just the
individual
distinction.
is themselves. Yeah, just to finish. I mean to remove the distinction here a little bit, or at least specify something I think is quite interesting. We could talk about the whole population, but if you could instead, and I think you should, you view one individual person, and that one individual person is many people throughout a lifetime, and the life of that person is
Hmm.
itself sort of a population, like individual. Looking at that one individual, it's sort of you see shifts and changes, and there are periods of that person's life where if you want to be a literary critic, will read the Bible in one way, and then later in their life they'll read it this way, and then later in their life they'll read it that way. Like there are many
Sure.
different stages that people have in their lives, and I think that's kind of important when we speak about whether or not people need the quote salve of Catholicism or of whatever structured, organized religion has to offer. I think it's so much more than just all the different humans in a space, and then like I don't know, like 80% of them require it. It's that something, something that it's happening to these people right now, but we're all capable of all sorts of strange things.
Hmm. So I wonder on that point then, to kind of loop this back in to the conversation we've been having. I mean, one of the central parts of Christianity is in part dealing with hubris by, through the worship of God and the refraining from
by
sin,
supplication.
and yeah, like basically suppressing that through the religious practice. So is it that, I mean, like this is what I try to tell people when I talk to them about religion, is like I understand why people have this. This is, as a matter of fact, the same person that I was making that joke about the Bible TLC with. I was talking about this. I was like, look, don't take this the wrong way. Like I understand why you have like why this is such a big part of your life. I'm just like
But
there are
I'm
other
asking
things
you
that
to
I do.
understand that's not a big part of mine. You know what I mean?
Right. And then it's like I don't need like Michael was saying, I don't need the transcendent aspect of this, because that part is to me just factually
But
untrue, but I understand the core, like what you're getting out of it.
some people do though. To like credit Michael,
Hmm.
Michael's above my head, so I'm going to point up. So Michael, in my screen. So Michael, I think is right though that some people do need the transcendent, at least right now. I mean, Bray, the fact that you even know what the transcendent is means that you've encountered it on some level, unless you're just using it as a word. You've encountered it at some levels, meaning in some sense, you've seen something out there, something which you could comprehend and understand why other people need it.
Oh,
At least right
correct.
now, that person in this period of their life, in this stage, uh, is subsisting upon that notion of the transcendent. Now,
Hmm.
we can get into like this whole point of like the difference between transcendent philosophy and religion, like organized doctrinal religion, because I do think there is a distinction, there is a difference there. But for some people, and for some period of their lives, they need this robust, seemingly robust doctrinal way of encountering the transcendent, seemingly. And I think that that's something important to take into consideration.
Hmm.
Well, okay.
And
See,
it doesn't speak to their intelligence. I don't mean to say that they're less intelligent. Not at all. Not at
No,
all.
yeah.
no.
Just the way that they're
I
organized
understand
is
that.
different.
Yeah. So I think yes, it's well and good to say that like religion acts as a salve or it's some sort of like psychological crutch or whatever you want to call it. At a certain point, though, like a lot of people are religious because uh, their phenomenological experience of transcendent, like sensory perception, whatever you want to call it, um, has confirmed for them that the transcendent exists, and therefore it confirms a whole slew of other things, including their post-mortal coil existence and
He said the
the
thing.
He said
contingencies
the
thereof.
thing.
And so what you run into is not only, oh, this is a salve, you also run into this is a collar and chain. You run
Well,
into this is
yeah.
an objective fact of reality as I understand it as a God worshiper. And if you try to tell me it's not like this, I mean, you're gonna have a hell of a hard time falsifying it.
Well, I think one important aspect of this is to note that atheism isn't the default necessarily. I mean, you feel it. You feel the one. Let me finish. Let me finish, because I will disagree with you on this if we go down this road. You can be the notion, like the feeling, the thing, the thought that like we're all like atheists, like as we enter into this. What am I trying to say? Basically, I think people that exist within a doctrinal worldview, people that like somebody who was raised in like I don't know, like Egypt or someone who was raised in Afghanistan, like that perspective, like you do become the little bits and pieces and bits of evidence of your world around you. You encounter the world through the shapes and pieces of the world that are around, and in those things around you, your parents, your loved ones. The objects around you, the television set, whatever it is, you use those things in order to conceive of a self and then begin
but
engaging with
Trevor,
reality according to those means. And if all of that is within an ideological this, even though it's extremely different from the that you live in,
that's fine. That's
you
fine.
encounter
But
reality, this is their default, and it would be wrong to assume that if that
okay,
go please
but just because the square fits in the circle hole doesn't mean that God exists. Like,
no, you're right. I mean, I'm
that's
not telling
exactly
you
what you just said.
With that
Like,
argument,
no.
Just because a child can look at their little box toy, and just because the little shape fits in another shape, doesn't mean that God is real.
Are you calling people
Like,
children?
No, I mean, my point on that is just that it's like, even if you are born into a particular ideological box,
no matter how
where
fast they
people
try to preach to you as you come out of your mother, you're
they're
not going to get it.
they're
way.
playing
Like,
the sermon
I
to
know
the
people-
belly, like
I know people who grew up in atheist households who became religious later in life. I know agnostics who grew up and
Yeah, of
became
course.
weirdly
Yeah.
woo-woo spiritual later in life. But
What I'm really trying to say is, just because it happens to work doesn't mean that there's not a system that works better.
See, this is
that I completely agree with, because now we're talking about where we want things to go. I only mean to diagnose things as they presently are, so that we can better understand what they are. I mean to say that we ourselves. I know. Like the intuition is atheism is just a lack of theism. Therefore, it's a default. Like that's something that my brain
It
naturally
fundamentally
gravitates
has
to.
to be the default.
No, I see what you're saying. I do, but I also want to bring up that like the notions and the philosophies that bring us to this paradigm, the one where the four of us are talking here, and little things such as I'm currently wearing pants because that's what you're supposed to do. Like
But that's
little
not
things.
falsifiable.
I have yet
like
to
that.
see any evidence that you are wearing pants.
I'm not. All
But
right,
but
fair
Trevor,
enough.
like
I can
just
AGI some pants as I stand up, but
just to complete the point, let's make a compromise this way, and I think you'll think this is clever too. If we had if we had children raised without gods, it does not mean that they will not invent new ones.
right.
Sure, certainly. So what I was trying to say is just that all of these things are ideological lenses. Like I'm not.
Yeah.
It's you would be real hard pressed to take off every lens and then finally behold and see
You
as
can't.
it is.
You now know
No.
you can't take all those lenses off.
No. So this is what I'm saying.
I'm built different.
This
I
man.
have moksha.
Thanks, God.
Yeah, my
this man.
qualia is free of bias, and you can't
I
tell
don't
me
interpret
otherwise.
my qualia; they just happen.
My veil has been lifted.
I'm completely dissociated from the action.
Yeah, I exist as energy and consciousness. Thank you.
I'm just the observer.
Very good. Very good.
I am the quantum superposition.
Very. Yes, most certainly. Well, I think we're kind of wrapping up this topic quite quite nicely. Although I don't think we really talked wildly about hubris. We kind of
Well,
went
what
on
is
a
We
the
did.
A couple
solution?
of like,
tangent.
aspects of it, right? We covered we
You're right.
defined it ourselves. We looked at the etymology. We kind of discussed like historical, mythological examples, contemporary mythological examples, historical actual examples. We looked at it from the angle of like, okay, well, why does hubris happen? We did some psychoanalysis, and then we looked at like, what does it do in a society? What does it do when it exists? And then we looked at like, well, maybe we can question some of these narratives because they're PR. And then like, we also looked at like, what are some things that actually prevent hubris? And I think that's kind of what Bray was getting at with honor, and what I was kind of injecting ability for is like,
Mm-hmm.
it controls or maneuvers hubris into a more useful framing, I think, to have those things.
And
Michael, have you
I
ever
would just
worked as a
interject there.
secretary?
Yeah.
I was
Sorry,
just
what?
I was just asking Michael if he's ever done any secretary work, because there was just some phenomenal meeting notes that he
Yeah,
just pulled right
really.
off the dome right there. Like,
I have to say, I was very impressed. Well done.
But I would like to interject there. All I meant to say earlier was that, like, instead of language like honor, we could just use language like consciousness or mindfulness or something.
yeah,
Conscientiousness is one of my favorite little terms.
Yeah.
Because it means you're paying attention. It means you're injecting a little bit of caring about what you're paying attention to. And things turn out nicer, more pleasant because of it.
start telling people, I need you to act like you have more than like 2 dialogue options. Like,
Right.
I need you to act like you
I
are
would never say that.
part of the main quest.
For real. But no, I mean, just jumping off where Michael, was. I actually really liked that we talked about the slave master morality. I need to revisit those subjects and try and see the original language on those. We talked a lot about myth, and of course, I personally jumped in the way of every myth that we talked about. Because I am quite serious about this. Like, in the absence of myth, we'll just make new ones, right? And I'm not just trying to repeat the last thing that I said. I'm really trying to suggest to the listener, as like my outgoing thing here, your myths are not special. Most especially the ones that you made about your childhood. You know what I mean? So like, you have this idealized version of like the way you were raised and like how you came up and what you did, and all you have to think about is like your grandpappy's like stories about how they walked uphill both ways to get to school and so on. Like those are idealized mythological stories. They're no longer happening. They're myth now, and so like you have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And I love how Michael put that. The only religion is boiled down to nothing but the PR of other people. You know what I mean?
Right.
But for real, there's a lot of let's put it this way. No matter what religion you belong to or a religion you belong to, there's a lot of usefulness in understanding that like your religion is not actually that special. As it's been said before, you're atheist to so many other gods. And to tie this back into what Trevor was really trying to talk about, my last words are this. I really think that my original definition holds up, especially in that assumption part. Let's get away from religion, but say this last thing. If you're really proud of your religion, you're just assuming that you've got the right one. If you're a proud member of the manosphere, then you just assume that not having a dick and balls like makes you non-human, like you know what I mean, or subhuman, or another degree of human, and you're just wrong. And it's really, really important to think about that sort of thing. I really, really like this topic.
We use myth to inform reality, not to make it reality.
Yeah.
Well, Bray, I was going to say, if you had any interesting thoughts, I suppose.
I love myth, but we gotta remember what it's all for.
We gotta remember its point, its usefulness.
It's like what was that episode we were talking about? What's the point of an economy if it's run by robots? What's the point of reality if we keep living in the myth? Nonstop.
Strong point. And Michael, you have been you've been wonderful, and you did quite well at summarizing just then. And I wanted to hear what you thought about the ending conclusion, or if you had any ending conclusions for this particular topic.
So effectively, cutting through the myth and cutting through, the PR and whatnot. Hubris is a tool to motivate action within groups of people, and over time, it will cause problems. It will break things apart. In the short run, it may do some channeling of energy and motion within the group, but ultimately, it's gonna tear you down. And maybe well-placed hubris is not the worst thing in the world. As you said before, it's encroaching on the gods. And while there's basically 2 points of view here, people who think, we should be anarcho-primitivists and just kind of live in the woods and be peaceful and communal. There's also, of course, the move forward section of that dialectic, which is we want to advance and continue to grow as a species, right? And necessarily, we will actually want some degree of hubris within the individuals moving our species forward, because otherwise they would not dare to do the things that they do.
Well, I think that's probably the best way to break. I think the only thing I would say, just to add on to what Michael just mentioned, is which is what you just said was, I think we have to recognize that there isn't one solid framework, like the one thing we've been beating around for this whole episode. There's not this one framework from which hubris can be seen. It's useful in context. It's not useful in context. Yada 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 yada. And we find ourselves no longer speaking of what is pleasing to the gods. So we're not quite sure what things need to be pleasing to. We can then say well, it could be pleasing to humans. Well, who said that? Well, I did. Well, why do you matter? We start having this conversation, and I think it's just important that even hubris is fitted within this context. This lack of context, this multi-context that all of these concepts can exist within, and that they all can be useful, depending on what it is that you want, what it is the context is, which is now shifting, flowing, ebbing, changing. And it's not one consistent narrative framework anymore. And we're going to have to square that circle eventually. How to work within a multi-layered, multifaceted, organic, shifting, dynamic system and moral framework. How exactly can you...
The groundless ground, the Keegan Stage 5.
Yes, this is related to that one other episode we did where you supplied us that article that we all read about the meta... I think what was it? Meta rationality. Yes. So I think there's a certain meta morality. Yes. So I think this is touching on the same essential idea, except more of a meta morality or a meta.
You're still measuring against something, right? You're still measuring, meta ratio.
Yes, so I feel like we should break into that topic question as well eventually, though we do not have time today. So so I think maybe we'll just end it right there. Thank you everyone for listening in. This has been episode 51.
Woo!
My God,
we're on the second leg
We
to
Mortal
100.
Coils.
We're second leg to 100. Yeah, I agree with that.
And we will actually do something at 100. When we get there,
Pizza
we will
party.
do something. Yeah, everyone's invited. It's over at Bray's place. I'll type his address in the chat.
Yeah, hopefully by that time I have, hopefully in 50 episodes later, it'll be in a completely different place. So,
how long have we been doing this? Like a year?
Over a year.
Over a year, yes. We started during a Christmas. Yeah.
So, in other words, we can expect 2 Christmases from now for Bray to have a place. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's the plan now. We're all going
I certainly hope
make
so.
a mental note.
And I'm
in
sure
50 episodes, in 49 episodes time, we're all going to look around and see where we all are.
Right.
See how we've evolved. It'll be very nice.
Well, it's been good.
The mustache will
be
continue
good to
to jump around between people.
Yeah, that's correct. That is correct. Very good.
All
right. Well, everyone, be good to each other, and you have a wonderful night, and see you next time.